Hello, everyone. This is the webinar that you've decided to attend. So last chance to drop out just in case you clicked on the wrong link. Wanted to get started by sharing something that I always find quite personal and passionate to me, which is always looking at the LinkedIn Workplace Learning Report and always thinking about what are the focus areas for people like you. And number one should never be a surprise for the umpteenth year running about trying to actually align learning programs to business. We know this is the number one pain point. We know how difficult it is to do. We know isolating performance through learning interventions is very difficult to do. And today's session is, well, how do we get there? How do we move there? And how do we do it in a meaningful way? And when I think about what are the various different ways that really stops you from generating impact, it's kind of a few things. Not having the right data, or maybe that data is gatekept somewhere in your organization. Lack of partnership, maybe to that gatekeeping part, maybe there's a part of the business that you just don't know anyone. They don't necessarily speak to you depending on where you're sitting in the business. It could be a skill gap. Measuring impact is difficult. It's messy, it takes time, it takes a lot of momentum, lack of time, not to mention technology. And so if I were to ask you what prevents you from generating impact in your organization, well, it's probably a mix of a lot of these. And so when we think about all those things that are stopping us, I'd like to actually take a page from James Clear's Atomic Habits, one of my favorite books in recent memory. And for him, it's all about how do we build better habits, 1% at a time. And this graph was always very powerful to me. If we just focus on the 1% better every day, over the course of a year, what could we accomplish? And that's really the approach for me when it comes to impact measurement, is that how do we find a way to do the 1% better every day? Knowing how difficult it is to kind of swing for the fences and get all the way to that definitive ROI. The least we can do is be 1% better today than we were yesterday. So today, more than anything, it's going to be a hypothesis and an argument on my side, which is I think we spend way too much time obsessing over output, that is our courses and our platforms, that we actually forget about the input. And when we focus on the input, it actually will lead to greater results. So that's the argument for today. Hope I convince you by the end of it. And hopefully I can give you a set of strategies in order to get there. So let's find those marginal gains. But let's do it by focusing on the start, not the end. All right, now I can see myself twice on this screen here. Hello, everyone. My name is Josh. I'm the Chief Creative and Learning Officer of Sponge Group. Had a lot of roles in my career, all in the space of corporate training and digital learning. Worked with a lot of different industries, a variety of topics. I always like to say the feather in my cap is that I once did a training program on tire physics. You've never really lived unless you've done tire physics as a topic, so just putting that out there. But I think more than anything, my MO is that I help organizations and their leaders really think about learning excellence and how it can create impact within their organization. Quick little personal anecdotes. That's the picture of the best meal I've ever had in my life. It's a ramen shop in Tokyo. I'm not really big on celebrity culture, but if I were to meet one person, it would be Lin-Manuel Miranda, Hamilton, one of the greatest pieces of art in modern memory. And I am part of a very special group of people. I want to say about 0.01% of daily Duolingo users. And my daily streak right now, and this is actually a little bit outdated, I'm actually at 2,700 days on a Duolingo learning streak in German. Not yet at the point where I can deliver this entire presentation in German, but I'm getting there. And more than anything, I want to hope to convince you that the best way to approach impact measurement is through those 1% gains. So today, more than anything, I want to leave you with confidence in thinking strategically about the different problems that you may have and provide you a really simple methodology and framework to make you explicitly connect those learning initiatives to business priorities by focusing on the input value. So much of how we get to impact measurement is together by committee, by village. And so this is another way to how you can get more stakeholder buy-in and stakeholder budget support. And more than anything else, I hope that today I just give you confidence in building more strategic momentum in your organization as you're using learning initiatives to create impact for the business. All right, let's get going. I spend a lot of time speaking with senior leaders in orgs, whether in a learning function or whether in a business lead, but training and learning and enablement sits within their remit. And I sort of reflect on, well, what makes the best ones great? It's not a perfect science here, but I would kind of talk about it in five different ways. One is they've got an acute awareness of what exactly is a priority in their organizations. They are so tapped into what the business is trying to accomplish. Two, they never default to training as the answer. And this is especially true for those that actually have training within their remit and are responsible for creating and disseminating training within the organization. They resist the temptation to always say, well, training needs. They invest in their evidence infrastructure. Evidence is one of the three E's we believe in. I'll talk about that in a second. But they know that part of the evidence infrastructure is about getting the right data, getting the right technology, getting the right culture in place in order to do it. And to the point of the 1%, they truly believe in progress over perfection. In my experience with impact measurement, it's quite a defeatist argument when you just look all the way to that Kirkpatrick level four and say, well, we're never going to get there, so we might as well just stick to completion and likability. If you think about that 1% progress, what would that look like? And in my experience working with these leaders, they're not afraid of that incremental gain. And whenever they're in doubt, they just always reframe the challenge. Maybe we're not focusing on the right problem to solve. And when I kind of look at all of these five as a whole, it's kind of one thing that stands there as a reflection for me, and that is they just know how to ask good questions. That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how we ask better questions of ourselves, of our teams, of the business, so that we can find ways to create better impact measurement. Now, I wanted to just kind of frame this in a way. This is at Sponge, we use this, it's called our 3E learning strategy. I don't want to spend the entire time today talking about this framework, but rather one very interesting component of it, which is called the compelling question. Obviously, you've heard about it in the title. That's what I want to focus on today, but I'll just really briefly walk you through what exactly 3 is so that it can help you understand how the compelling question really kind of cradles everything in there. So what is 3E? Well, I kind of think of it as a mental napkin exercise. Super simple. Once you have it in your head, it's not going to leave you. It's a great way to just calibrate and diagnose, am I answering the real question that I'm trying to achieve to get to the results that I'm trying to get to? And more than anything, just a really flexible way to think strategically. We often don't have the time or the capacity or the momentum to think strategically. And so the impetus behind this framework is that you just always have this. So you're always thinking strategically in a structured way, even when you feel like you're not forming. So what are the elements of the 3E? Well, the first is capture the big picture. I'll talk about that in a second. Two, draft the compelling question. Ooh, what's that? We're going to find more. Then you want to craft your 3E hypothesis. And I use hypothesis as in sort of an antagonizing way, to be quite honest with you, because I'm a learning professional. I have learning in my job title, but even I know that learning interventions are a hypothesis. It's a strategic bet. Much like every organization is making a series of strategic bets. One of them is we believe that this combination of three E's, experiences, environments, and evidence, is going to be the best way to answer the question that we're trying to ask. Once you've got that hypothesis, analyze it, scrutinize it, strategize, and iterate. I want to focus on sort of the first two pieces here today because really the core of today's message is about how we get questions right to really unlock so much more. So really briefly, the way we capture the big picture is, well, the simplest step, to be honest with you, but the one that is often most overlooked. And that is understand where the business is today and understand where it wants to go. I can't tell you how often I work with really talented talent and learning leaders that are so good in their field, but can't actually articulate what's going on in the business. So go and find your priorities. And it's pretty easy to find them, especially if you've got a public listed company, shareholder reports, CEO town halls. Go and do the actual legwork to go speak to very senior stakeholders and say, what are your priorities? What are you trying to accomplish this year? And the main reason why you do this is because wherever you find priorities, you find budget. And that's just the way of the world in organizations is that you want to have sponsorship tied to what the priorities are. Now, once you know where the business wants to go, then it really helps you draft what we call the compelling question. And the way that I would sort of frame it is if you could distill your entire challenge, think of the project you're working on right now. And if it helps, actually pull out a piece of paper or a blank document and start thinking about your compelling question. And hopefully by the end, maybe you even got a rough draft of your compelling. But if you could distill the challenge of what you're trying to do in a single question, what would it be? If you were to look back on this, the great project that you did and the success that you had, and you were to write a case study about it, what was the problem that you set out to do? And so for me, the question is always the compass. It guides you. It guides you to where you want to go. But you need to invest in getting the question right. If you don't ask the right question, it's sort of that garbage in, garbage out analogy. So that's the idea behind how we get the question right. So I want to spend the rest of our time today really diving into this. Uh, there's no tech sell here. I have nothing to sell you in terms of platforms and demos. This is just good old fashioned getting strategy right. And so hopefully the strategies that I use and we use as a team can really help you kind of sort through and provide sort of an elegance and structure to what's already going on in your organization. So I'm going to walk through the 5 elements of a great compelling question. The first is it reframes the challenge. It uses the language of how. It's mapped to a business imperative. We're starting to see why step 1 was so important. It doesn't contain the words training or learning. Ooh, what's that, Josh? That sounds spicy. And more than anything, it is compelling. People are energized around solving it. That last piece might be the hardest one, depending on how where you are in terms of your confidence of writing good questions. But it's the reason why compelling is in the title compelling question. It is the most important. I think it's also good to think about this as more art than science. Uh, Working with organizations on crafting their compelling questions. I don't have a scorecard per se of this is a 10 out of 10 compelling question. It's actually more than anything, just a catalyst to get you and your team thinking about are we asking the right question? So don't be too beholden by the 5 steps and getting to the rigidity of what they ask for. I'd rather be more inspired by it. At the end of the day, the best compelling question is the one that gets your entire team and your organization galvanized. So let's walk through these one by one because I think it's really important. I'm very big as sort of a senior leader. I'm very big on mindset. I think mindset dictates everything we do, certainly in terms of how we do strategic planning. And so I want to walk through the mindset behind getting the compelling question right because I think it'll really help you and your team understand why would we care so much about a question, Josh? Just a question. Can't I just go get courses and attach it to a thing? Depends on what the question is, to be honest. The first one is reframing the challenge. And the reason why we need to reframe the challenge is because oftentimes, certainly when you come from a learning or training background, you tend to think that, well, the challenge is a knowledge gap, and the best way to fill a knowledge gap is training. And there really isn't any other sort of solution other than just saying, here's a formal training, a structured training. It doesn't have to be that formal and structured at times, but rather saying, well, when it comes to knowledge gaps, training is the best solution. However, when you're solving a business challenge, there's a lot of different ways that add as pieces to the end solution, and training is just one of them. And the reason why we reframe the challenge is because when you situate the challenge from a learning challenge to a business challenge, all of a sudden you understand, oh, I'm not in this alone. And that actually is liberating. It's quite free to be able to do it. And so think about how training never acts in isolation in your organization and what else is happening to try and impact that key priority, that key business challenge. Ultimately, the challenge is never just a knowledge challenge. And I can't stress this enough because it's so tempting to think that sometimes in our role and remit, whether you're a capability leader or leading a function about better enablement of people, to just say we need to fill knowledge gaps. I mean, I often think of it as the myth of the rational learner, where we just assume people are primed to take in knowledge and automatically apply it to the skills and behaviors needed to change in their job. But we're solving so much more than just a knowledge challenge. And when you frame it in the context of a business, what more do you need to do to be able to solve that challenge and not just the learning challenge? The next piece is that it uses the language of how. Now, this is quite inspired from the world of design thinking from anyone who's familiar with that. There's power in a how might we question. And it's something that I always check with myself, and certainly as I'm moving towards solutioning mode about, well, what are my biases here? And a how question is open, whereas a what question is already leading. It's leading to, well, what kind of training can we create? And how, well, how creates humility. And I think it's really important that as we approach a business challenge, we understand, and I've had the privilege of working with quite a lot of Fortune 50, Fortune 100 companies. Some of the ones where you're just like, wow, this is quite the challenge to solve. But the humility part of it is that everyone's going through the same challenges. Everyone is trying to sell better. Everyone is trying to retain their best people. Everyone is trying to inspire the next class of leaders in their organization. And so there's a humility to solving a really tough problem. And by asking a how question, we're better able to open ourselves to having a constructive dialogue of, well, are we making sure that we're getting the right solution in place rather than just leading to a what or when, sort of a more closed approach. The next one, tied to the first one, is map to a business imperative. This is kind of like an obvious one. Well, obviously, Josh, it should be mapped to a business imperative, but I can't tell you how many times I've encountered a situation where we're not thinking about measurement on the other side. This to me comes back to my hypothesis of how much time we're spending on the output versus the input. Now, the reason why is because, well, if we live in a world of courses and LMSs or LXPs, oftentimes we're not thinking of the metrics. We're not thinking of the business imperatives. We're just kind of isolated to, well, all we can really do is measure completion and activity. But this, when you think about it, these are the metrics that we need to think about. Now, it took me less than 5 minutes to come up with this list. So imagine if you had an hour with the most important people in your org and getting access to them. Whatever lane you operate in, what metrics could you run away? And the thing that is really important here is that ultimately, the business is always going to measure these metrics. Whether with or without you, they're always going to measure these metrics. And so if you can find your way to just sneak your way into any one of these, you're doing the business a tremendous amount of great work. And the reason why I keep talking about linking it to business priorities is that where you find business priorities, you also find budget. Now, also, it doesn't need to be that sort of rigid, I guess, in terms of metrics. It is really hard to say, oh, because of this learning intervention, people sold 50% more. So if you can't find the rigid metric, or you're a little bit intimidated by it, tap into the more strategic vision. And this once again comes back to, do I know what my org strategic priorities are? Oftentimes, and you'll find this in sort of a shareholder report, or you'll find this in your CEO's yearly kickoff, you'll find these great aspirational statements like, well, we want to be the best place to work in the industry, or we want to be the global leader in creating an ethical culture, or and this sort of aspirational, compelling language, to be honest with you. Even when you can't tie it to a specific business outcome, tie it to the strategic vision. And the reason why I say this once again is because where you find the business priorities, you find the budget. So whether it's the aspirational statement, but and this is sort of another sort of decoding device, when a CEO unveils their 5 priorities, that also means instantly they've assigned budget to those 5 priorities. So if you can tap into that, you can tap quite easily into getting the buy-in that you need to sponsor the program that you think is going to have value. So whether it's the rigid metric or whether it's more of the aspirational statement, make sure that your question is leaning towards those. Now to my favorite one of the criteria, and I say this as a learning professional, it doesn't contain the words learning or training. Why? Well, I think sometimes for those of us that have this sort of responsibility within our remit, we tend to immediately gravitate towards it needs to be training. It needs to be a learning X. Of course, it should. That's what our role is. That's what our responsibility is. But the great thing about not including it in there is that it's almost a freeing statement. It helps you understand what exactly is the essential components that's going to best solve that. Sometimes it's a behavioral component, sometimes it's an environmental component, of which learning can add tremendous value in it. But when you intentionally remove learning and training, one, you get more buy-in, because for a good chunk of your team outside of your immediate team, people aren't really inspired by creating more training. They're inspired by solving real business problems. And so what we do when we use the compelling question is we plot it on the 3E equation. Have your compelling question and ask yourself, what is the combination of experiences? And I use the word experience quite intentionally, not just a course, because it could feel like it could be a course, but it could be an in-person facilitation, it could be coaching, it could be mentoring, it could be a peer group, it could be an offsite. What's the combination of experiences and environments, not LMSs, not a tech place? It could be in person or it could be online. It could be asynchronous. It could be synchronous. And evidence, that is your data points. What is the combination of those 3 E's that are going to meaningfully answer your compelling question? And from there, you should be able to get more or less an intended result for how you do it. Now, when we include learning or training as part of our question, well, and I know that for a lot of us, we tend to get focused on building more training and making sure that it looks good and feels good and is engaging. But how far could asking, how do we build more engaging training take you? Apart from just saying, well, we're building more training that people like. Now, this gets a little bit awkward, especially when it's not tied to business priorities. But there's a line to be drawn between fulfilling the training requirements of your organization. And if you sit in a compliance role, for example, there's just regulatory needs to get it done. But once again, ask yourself and use the equation, please, as sort of like your napkin to help you understand what you need to try and do. How far will saying, I need to build training, or what kind of training we need to build in order to get this, versus just saying, take a step back. Training could be a part of the answer, but let's focus on the business priorities and then let's bring in the learning and training component. And then the final component, and this picture is quite intentional here, is that it's compelling. I'm a big food guy, love to eat. It's where I spend most of my money. And there's a common phrase in the culinary world, I guess, and that is to eat with your eyes. And how it looks is just as important as the feeling as when you actually eat it. And there's something about a compelling question and the way that it looks that just instantly gets inspiration and buy-in for what you're trying to do. So this last step is the hardest, but trust me, is the most important one. And the reason why is because, well, of the elephant in the room. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of the elephant and the rider. I'll take 2 minutes to explain to you because I find it's very powerful and I pretty much think about it every day. Jonathan Haidt, sort of a very popular social psychologist, came up with this really elegant metaphor for how the mind works. And he says, well, picture the mind as sort of a rider sitting on top of an elephant. Now, never seen an elephant in real life. Beautiful, majestic creatures, but elephants are big. And well, I don't think a rider can really move an elephant that far. The elephant walks where it wants to walk. Now, the rider represents the rational part of the brain, the one that says, well, I should probably eat healthier. I should probably not have that last chocolate right before I go to bed. Let me tell you, my rider is out of control. The elephant, on the other hand, is like, oh, maybe I'll sleep in today. Or I'm, a little bit lazy. Maybe I will spend the next 5 hours binge watching my favorite show. And the constant dance between the rider and the elephant is how the brain works and how we make decisions. And if we just focus too much on the rider, well, we just end up going in circles. We spend too much focusing on the elephant, well, there's no real clear path for what we need to do. And so we need to speak to the rational brain just as much as the emotional brain. The elephant loves to hear stories. The elephant is inspired by what the other elephants are doing. But if you try and force the elephant too much in one direction by telling the rider in an overly rational way, the elephant's just not going to let you go. And if you ask me, the business world just needs more elephant content. And that's the idea behind the compelling questions. What's the piece that's going to inspire your team, to inspire your org to want to really answer the question? And so our role as sort of the originators of compelling questions, we just need to set the table. We need to set the table for more sponsorship. We need to set the table for more business buy-in. Because when you set the table and you have an inviting question, you have a greater chance of getting that support that you need to truly answer the question in a meaningful way. All right, so 5 components that I just walked you through. Reframes the challenge, uses the language of how, map to a business imperative, doesn't contain the words learning or training, and is compelling. So that was a lot about what goes into a compelling question. Why don't we run through a few examples? And these are inspired from current sort of client work, obviously redacted because these are very important challenges to the organization. But I wanted to walk you through the process of some questions and why they work and don't work that can give you not only some examples, but also inspiration for how you can correct your question. And if I could ask, if you've ingested those five elements, start writing down what you think compelling questions. I'd love to hear about it after if you got it. So here's one. How might we build the deepest trust in our leadership team for a better future for both employees and customers? Now, I would say that feels quite compelling. That feels aspirational. That feels like something that I put a lot of hope into. But I would also say that's quite vague. Deepest trust, better future. I think every organization is trying to build a better future for their employees and their customers. I'd like to hope so. And so, how do we add more specific language to this so that we balance the aspirational quality with actually the business priority that we're focused on solving? Here's another one. How do we uplift profitability of our creators through greater alignment between customer education and product innovation verticals? Now, that sounds like a precise question. That sounds like the exact metric you want to impact and where to go find it in order to impact it. But I'd also say it's a little bit jargony, not gonna lie. It's not particularly inspiring, but to the art and science of it, if it's inspired within the culture of your org, don't let me get in the way of you. But there's a balance piece here between having something compelling, too vague, uh, and something that's jargony and too focused on the specifics. And so there's an element here of how do I get more people on board with this in a less jargony way. Here's another one. How might we reduce tension between our two new divisions to boost productivity in the next 6 months? Now, this was inspired from a client that just went through quite a rigorous M&A phase, bringing new business units into the business. And they came to us saying, hey, we need to find a way to get these two units to kind of work as one. Now, very valid question. Another sort of kind of perennial problem that a lot of organizations are trying to solve, certainly in that stage. But I would say that's just not compelling, to be honest with you. Reducing tension, that's quite negative language. Boosting productivity, I would say, well, I think every organization is trying to boost productivity, but is there a different reframe for that that can get more inspiration from not just your stakeholders, but also remember your end users? Now, it's up to you whether or not you want to include your end users in the formation of this question, but the compelling question is a really powerful way to get buy-in from all your. So here's a real quick fire series of examples. Once again, more art, less science. These are examples of current clients and some recently conducted projects that we've had as well too. I think the most important part of this was how it just reignited enthusiasm and momentum for the project. We weren't just building training, we were solving real business problems. And it may feel like you're doing it at the same time, but unless you've got the right question to lead you and be that compass, sometimes you just get drawn down the rabbit hole of, well, I just need to build. If you haven't captured all this, don't worry. We can share this presentation afterwards so you can keep it with you and be inspired with you. I also wanted to talk about how the compelling question in itself and getting there, even its imperfections, is powerful in its own way. So I'd recommend to you, take the 5 rules, go bring it to your team and say, hey, I saw this crazy guy pitch to me for 40 minutes about how I need to have 5 elements into a compelling question. Can we try it out? And this is a good example of where a customer came to us and said, we actually want this on the left. Can you please design a content approach to create an empowered and capable organization with a clear understanding of key sustainability topics? We said, sure, we can do that. But is that really answering what you're trying to accomplish? You can see the language in there. It's not a question, but there's a language already moving towards output. There's a language already moving to, well, I think I have a vague understanding of my priorities as a business, but I think the best way to do it is to build content. So what we did was actually transform this into their version of compelling question. And so content approach to build stuff on sustainability topics ended up becoming, how do we make our sustainability mission relatable, actionable, and aligned across the business to meet a very clear target of 2030? Now that creates space. That creates space for them to go to the rest of the sustainability team and say, are you trying to answer the same question as well too? Because we are. And maybe we can help with the relatable piece. Maybe we can help with the align piece, certainly if you're building courses that scale across, 5,000 people across the globe. And so the journey in itself of coming up together with a compelling question is just as powerful. So even if you feel like, well, we don't love our compelling question, the idea of even getting to a compelling question, I find, is very powerful in the price that we work. Okay, here's another example that I wanted to share, and this is from current client, which is sort of a Fortune 100 company in the world. What we actually did was we approached this engagement without a compelling question. We said, "Do you want to build it together?" And so this was the output that we worked with them in a session where we kind of did a kind of a quick kind of mirror board session building our compelling question. And so we asked the question, and then we also tried to answer the question with these little things that you see on the side of it. Uh, this was such an exciting moment for us because it's one thing for us as a vendor to come in and be like, well, this is what we think. But it galvanized the client side of the team so much to be able to get this wording right because they knew if they got this right, everything else becomes a lot easier. I just wanted to share another current client example of how we actually take them on the journey from the very beginning. And depending on who your stakeholders are and how much time and energy they have, it's a really powerful tool in order to get there. And the reason, coming back to the compelling part of the compelling question, and this is where I find it really starts to get powerful, is that when you've plotted it in this type of equation, what you're really trying to do is tell your larger team, this is what I'm really trying to do. I'm not just trying to build another learning piece. I'm not just trying to take up more time and effort of your people's time. I'm trying to seriously answer this question. And so, to bring an example from a retailer client that we had, they wanted to build better brand ambassadors in order to uplift retail sales. We came up with a robust answer of, well, these are the experiences on the environments and the evidence that you need. And these are the metrics that we think we're going to impact in order to get it. Now, just imagine how hard it'd be able to do this without getting the question right. That's the power of the compelling question. And the other thing, too, is if you look at those metrics on the right side over there, you're not the only one trying to solve for those. You're not the only person trying to impact those. And this is where you get so much more buy-in from the rest of your team. And by buy-in, I mean not only stakeholder support, access to data, but also just budget buy-in to say, you know what? I as well am trying to improve our product knowledge confidence or get our managers more engaged. How can I help? Well, here's the question. Do you agree with it? And here are the interventions and what they look like and how it looks like in order to get there. Just a really powerful, simple visual in order for you to get there. All right. I hope this has inspired you to write your own compelling question. I can't tell you how much it inspires us when we speak to clients for the first time, and even in the midst of a project when we're trying to really focus through, are we getting to the place of impact that we want to? So, a compelling question reframes the challenge. It switches the conversation to a genuine problem to be solved, not just a knowledge gap. It uses the language of how. Once again, kind of avoids jumping to solution mode. You ask a what question, and you already find you're leading to the answer rather than actually getting to the question. And it also resists the temptation to think in terms of courses and platforms. It's so easy to say, well, it needs to be that because, well, our tech stack tells it needs to be that way, or our learning culture needs to be that, or we only have a certain amount of assigned learning hours. Resist the temptation by asking a how question. It's mapped to a business imperative. And if there's one thing that I'd love for you to walk away from today is that if you don't have a real clear understanding of your org's strategic imperatives, go find out. It's not that hard. Go find out. And you'll just feel so much more equipped and confident for how you come back to a compelling question. It doesn't contain the words learning or training. And what I really love about this, apart from being a little cheeky, is that it actually gives you a tremendous amount of focus. Gives you a tremendous amount of focus so that when you've got the right people in the room, you can say, this is the limits of a learning intervention. Just letting you know, this is as far as it can go. We can still impact it. It's still a valuable piece of the puzzle, but don't expect it to solve everything. And that's where actually removing it out of the question gives a tremendous focus when you put it back into the answer. And then the last part is, well, we need to set the table because we can't do it alone. And if there's another sort of big takeaway for you, remember the world needs more elephant content. And your compelling question is one of the ways you build more elephant content into what you do. feel like I'm going to get some interesting LinkedIn comment. But it is what it is. So a reminder, once again, your compelling question just helps you stay focused on the real problem to solve. And I can't stress this enough. When you get the question right, everything else opens up. It helps you get meaningful buy-in, and there's budget buy-in as well too. One thing I love about a compelling question is that it helps you identify your blind spots. Sometimes in writing the question, you feel like you're answering your own question when you really shouldn't. And you know you've got it right when you genuinely don't have a good answer for it. That's how you know you're actually on the right track. It helps you establish a single source of truth. And sometimes how you're navigating the culture of your org, or sometimes even the politics of your org, sometimes you need a single source of truth. And there's something that is quite non-negotiable of saying, well, we all agree on this being the business priority. So how do we get there? And lastly, and like I said, the piece that I really wanted to help you with today is that 1% strategic momentum, a 1% incremental increase by saying, hold on, I spend a lot of time over here, but maybe if I spend a little bit more time in the question, it'll actually help me get to that impact map place quite well. So wrapping up now, and just kind of key takeaways. Once again, happy to share this presentation with anyone who's interested or involved. Getting the question right gets a lot of things right. So if you haven't really formally included the question in here and what you're trying to do, the first paragraph of the brief, focus on your question today. And even if you do arrive on courses and platforms, and we know we all have realities in our organization that we just need to face, maybe the best and only tool is to build a course, and that's fine. But at least you will have gone through the right process to answer the question. I gave you a glimpse of our 3E strategy, the right experiences, environments, and evidence. Getting the question right helps you get the 3Es right as well too. And I mentioned earlier, get better at speaking the language of the business. You will make so many friends if you start speaking more in the language of the business and less in the language of learning and training, even though we both know you're talking about the same thing. And lastly, I shared with you a few examples of the journey we took some of our clients on. I can't tell you how much of a liberating moment, to be honest with you, is to have a vulnerable act of saying, I'm trying to craft this question. I don't really know if I'm getting it right. Here's some 5 arbitrary criteria, but I kind of believe in it. Can you help me build this question together? So the question is, well, it's the friends who made along the way, if you ask me. So hope you got a lot out of today. I did mention that I would get you out early, and well, I did. It was a pleasure to share this with you. If you did craft your own compelling question in this little bit of time, please reach out to me, share it with me. I'd love to hear more about it, and maybe even coach you a little bit on it too, if you allow me to. Here's some information to get in touch with me on LinkedIn or to get in touch with us over at Sponge. I hope this was a good use of your time. I'm just going to quickly check with my team if there's any questions I could ask or have answered. I think we're good. Thank you. Thank you for your time. And like I said, would love to hear and see your compelling question, and we can have a little exercise together about whether it's working. Thank you and have a great day, everyone.